The blizzard came without mercy. In the frozen forests of Alaska, a former Navy SEAL thought he had escaped war, until his German shepherd stopped cold, sensing death in the snow. 2 women hung from a tree, left for winter to finish the job. No witnesses, no rescue coming. But fate made one mistake. The man who found them was trained to move toward danger, not away from it. What followed was not a rescue. It was a reckoning, where faith, loyalty, and sacrifice collided in the coldest place on Earth. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please make sure to subscribe for more. Your support truly means the world. Winter had sealed the Alaskan wilderness in white silence, where wind erased distance and snow swallowed sound, turning the forest into a place without edges, without mercy. Daniel Brooks had chosen this place precisely because of that. At 35, he carried a body shaped by war and a face shaped by time that had not moved kindly. He was tall, a little over 6 feet, with shoulders still broad beneath layers of wool and canvas, though the sharp definition had softened into something heavier, slower. His hair was cut short by habit rather than regulation, dark brown threaded with early gray at the temples. A rough beard covered the angles of his jaw, not out of neglect but because mirrors no longer mattered to him. His eyes were the most telling thing, steel-colored, watchful, always slightly distant, as if some part of him remained stationed elsewhere. Years in naval special warfare had trained his body to respond without hesitation, but it was a roadside explosion overseas, one that killed 2 men under his command, that reshaped his temperament. Since then, Daniel avoided people not out of bitterness, but because silence felt safer than responsibility. He lived alone in a small cabin tucked into the trees, far from maintained roads, a structure built more for survival than comfort. The nights were long, and the storm warnings on the radio had been clear. By dusk, visibility dropped to nothing. Snow moved sideways, the kind of blizzard that erased trails in minutes and killed slowly rather than violently. Daniel had prepared the cabin methodically, securing shutters, stacking wood, checking the generator with practiced calm. He did not fear storms. He respected them. Rex did not. The German shepherd had been lying near the hearth when his posture changed. Rex was 6 years old, large even for his breed, with a thick black and tan coat scarred slightly along the flank from old service injuries. His ears rose sharply, and his head lifted as if pulled by a thread only he could feel. Rex had been a military working dog before retirement, trained to detect threats long before human senses could catch up. Unlike Daniel, Rex still trusted instinct without questioning it. His amber eyes fixed on the cabin door, muscles tightening beneath dense fur, breath controlled but urgent. Daniel noticed immediately. He had learned long ago to trust the silence between movements. Rex rose without sound and paced once, then again, nose angled toward the storm. The dog did not bark. He never did unless there was no other choice. Instead, he looked back at Daniel with an intensity that allowed no delay. Daniel felt the familiar shift inside his chest, the quiet recalibration from civilian stillness to operational focus. He layered on his outer coat, grabbed a flashlight and rope, and opened the door to a wall of white. The cold struck like a physical force. Wind tore at exposed skin, biting through fabric, carrying ice crystals that stung the eyes. Rex Wada, ahead immediately, head low, paws cutting through drifts with efficient strength. Daniel followed, every step deliberate, aware that disorientation was as deadly as exposure. His thoughts narrowed, shedding the weight of memory, replaced by the clarity he had not felt in years. This was movement with purpose. This was forward. They moved beyond the familiar perimeter of the cabin, deeper into the trees where the wind howled differently, funneling between trunks. Rex slowed, then veered sharply to the east, stopping beneath a towering spruce whose branches sagged under the weight of snow. Daniel's light swept the ground first, then upward, and his breath caught despite the cold discipline drilled into him. Two figures hung from the tree. They were women, suspended by ropes bound around their wrists and looped over a thick, ice-coated branch. Their boots hovered inches above the snow, bodies slumped, coats stiff with frost. One was smaller, her frame lean, her dark hair plastered to her face in frozen strands. The other was taller, broader in the shoulders, blonde hair pulled into a practical braid now undone by wind. Their ranger uniforms were torn and dirt-stained, insignia barely visible beneath ice. Their faces were pale, lips tinged blue, breaths shallow enough to be mistaken for stillness. Daniel felt the impact in a place beneath thought. This was not accident or wildlife. This was design. He scanned the tree line instinctively, noting broken branches, compressed snow, the absence of panic marks. Whoever had done this had known exactly what they were doing. They had not needed to stay. Winter would finish the work. Rex let out a low, restrained whine and moved closer, positioning himself beneath the women, body angled protectively as if his presence alone could anchor them. Daniel acted without pause. He assessed weight, rope tension, branch stability, calculating the order of release. The taller woman's head lolled dangerously, her breathing nearly imperceptible. She would not last long. As Daniel reached for his knife, he felt something settle inside him. Not anger, not fear, but recognition. This was the moment he had tried to outrun by coming here. The moment when walking away was no longer an option, because doing so would define him more than any war ever had. Snow continued to fall, relentless and indifferent. Somewhere deep in the forest, time was being measured in heartbeats and degrees. Daniel Brooks, who had come to Alaska to escape responsibility, stood beneath a frozen tree with a dog at his side and 2 lives hanging above him, and understood with absolute clarity that the storm had not called him here by chance. Daniel moved with controlled urgency, every motion economical as the storm pressed closer around them. The wind shifted, rattling the upper branches, sending loose snow cascading down in white curtains that blurred the edges of the scene. He positioned himself beneath the tree and looked again at the 2 women, forcing himself to read their bodies rather than their faces. The taller one, later known as Hannah Moore, had a build shaped by physical labor rather than training. Strong shoulders, long limbs, the kind of posture developed by years of climbing ridgelines and hauling equipment through rough terrain. Her blonde hair, once neatly braided, hung loose and stiff with ice, framing a face marked by exhaustion rather than fear. There was resolve there, even in near unconsciousness. Her ranger jacket was torn at the shoulder, the fabric darkened where frozen blood had soaked through. The smaller woman, Emily Carter, was lighter, leaner, with sharper angles and a narrower frame. Her dark hair clung to her cheeks, eyelashes rimmed with frost. She carried herself differently, even suspended, less brute strength, more alertness, as though her mind had fought longer than her body could follow. Daniel noted the difference immediately. Hannah's breathing was shallow and irregular, her chin slumped dangerously close to her chest. Emily's breaths came faster but steadier, her core still generating resistance against the cold. Hypothermia did not take everyone the same way. It took the strong first when pride kept them still. Daniel understood that logic too well. He had seen men collapse not because they were weaker, but because they had waited too long to admit vulnerability. He anchored the rope around his own waist, securing it to the trunk with a practiced knot that could be undone in seconds. His gloves came off briefly despite the cold, fingers numb but precise as he tested the tension of the rope holding Hannah. Rex remained directly below, positioning himself so that if the body dropped too fast, he could absorb some of the impact. The dog's breath steamed heavily, heat radiating upward in an instinctive offering. Rex was not panicking. He was working. Daniel cut the rope cleanly, controlling the descent, guiding Hannah's weight downward until her boots finally met the snow. Her knees buckled immediately. Daniel lowered her fully, easing her onto a ground pad he pulled from his pack, insulating her from direct contact with the frozen earth. He moved quickly but carefully, loosening frozen fabric at her collar to allow airflow, rubbing warmth back into her hands until color returned faintly to her knuckles. Only then did he look back up. Emily's body swayed slightly as the branch shifted. Daniel repeated the process, adjusting for her lighter weight, lowering her until Rex shifted again, pressing his flank against her legs to steady her. Once she was down, Daniel wrapped both women in spare thermal layers, sealing in what little heat remained. Snow continued to fall, filling footprints almost as soon as they were made. The forest showed no sign of witnesses, no sound beyond the wind. That silence felt intentional. As Daniel worked, his awareness expanded outward. He scanned the tree line again, noticing compressed snow leading away from the base of the tree, footprints deliberately spaced, efficient, not hurried. The rope fibers were synthetic, not something scavenged. This had been planned. He found a strip of fabric nailed to the trunk at eye level, stiff with ice. He did not read it yet. He did not need to. The message was clear without words. Emily stirred first, her body reacting to warmth with a slight tremor, her brow furrowed, muscles tightening as consciousness clawed its way back. Daniel steadied her gently, keeping her flat, adjusting her layers to prevent shock. Hannah remained still longer, her chest rising shallowly, pulse faint but present. Daniel monitored both, calculating the margin he had before the storm erased their chance of movement altogether. Rex stayed close, shifting only when Daniel needed space, then returning immediately to place himself between the women and the open forest. His coat was already rimed with snow, but his posture never slackened. This was not loyalty born of affection alone. This was training reinforced by years beside men who depended on him to read danger correctly. Rex did not look at the women as strangers. He looked at them as assigned. Daniel made the decision without hesitation. The cabin was over a mile away, terrain already becoming treacherous. Carrying both would slow him enough to risk losing all three. He secured Hannah first, lifting her with practiced strength despite her dead weight, her head resting against his shoulder, breath faint against his neck. Rex led the way back, stopping periodically to ensure Daniel followed the safest line. Once Hannah was secured on a makeshift sled, Daniel returned for Emily, whose awareness flickered in and out but whose body resisted surrender more fiercely. The storm intensified as they moved, wind tearing at exposed skin, snow filling Daniel's boots. Every step burned, every breath felt scraped raw. Yet, beneath the physical strain, something steadied him. The familiar sense of responsibility had returned, heavy but clarifying. He was no longer hiding, he was moving forward again. Behind them, the tree stood silent, branches sagging under fresh snow, erasing the violence it had witnessed. Whatever sentence had been passed there, winter had been denied its verdict. For now. The journey back to the cabin unfolded as a slow negotiation with the storm, each step measured against fatigue, terrain, and the fragile limits of the human body. Daniel moved first, carving a narrow path through drifts that climbed past his knees, the weight of Hannah secured behind him on the improvised sled cutting into his shoulders with steady insistence. His posture remained upright despite the strain, spine locked, breath controlled, a discipline learned from years when slowing down meant someone else did not make it home. Snow gathered in his beard and along the seams of his jacket, melting only where his body heat pushed back. The storm offered no mercy, only consistency. Rex worked the perimeter, circling ahead and then returning, his paws compacting snow into something passable, his nose constantly sampling the air for changes Daniel could not feel. The dog's coat had grown heavy with ice, yet his movements never faltered. His age showed only in the careful way he chose each step, conserving strength with the intelligence of experience rather than youth. Emily followed close behind Daniel, supported by a length of rope looped across his shoulder and around her waist. Her frame shook intermittently as circulation returned in uneven waves, but her legs continued to move, guided more by instinct than strength. She leaned forward slightly, eyes half open, attention fixed on the ground ahead, as if memorizing every route and rise to stay present. Daniel watched her peripherally, adjusting pace whenever her balance wavered, guiding without touching unless necessary. There was a resilience in her posture that suggested a woman accustomed to operating at the edge of endurance, someone who had learned long ago that panic wasted oxygen. Hannah remained unconscious, her breathing shallow but steady, protected beneath layered insulation and Rex's intermittent body heat when the dog pressed close during pauses. The cabin emerged gradually through the snowfall, its dark outline barely distinguishable from the surrounding trees, until Daniel was nearly upon it. He felt a shift then, a release of tension he did not fully acknowledge. The structure was simple, built low and solid, reinforced logs stacked with the precision of someone who valued function over aesthetics. Smoke no longer rose from the chimney, the fire inside having burned down hours earlier, but the building held warmth like a clenched fist. Daniel maneuvered the sled onto the porch, cleared ice from the door with a gloved forearm, and ushered Emily inside first, guiding her toward the hearth. Rex followed immediately, shaking once to rid himself of snow before returning to Hannah's side as Daniel brought her in next, lifting with controlled strength despite the protest in his muscles. Inside, the cabin transformed quickly. Daniel stripped away frozen layers, replaced them with dry wool and thermal blankets, and stoked the fire until heat pushed back the cold inch by inch. He worked with efficiency that bordered on reverence, movement steady, breathing even, eyes constantly assessing. The cabin smelled of pine resin, wet fabric, and the faint metallic trace of blood carried in from the forest. Emily was positioned near the hearth, but not too close, her circulation still fragile. Daniel monitored her carefully, adjusting her posture, massaging warmth back into extremities, grounding her without forcing awareness faster than her body could tolerate. Hannah was laid out on a reinforced cot near the fire's edge, elevated slightly to aid blood flow, her jacket cut away to inspect injuries. The torn shoulder fabric revealed bruising deep enough to suggest impact, her skin cold but slowly responding. Daniel's hands moved from one task to the next, unhurried yet relentless, as if time itself had narrowed to this room. Rex stationed himself between the two women, his body angled outward toward the door, eyes tracking Daniel's movements without losing awareness of the forest beyond the walls. His breathing gradually slowed as the warmth returned, but his vigilance did not fade. He shifted positions only to better block drafts or press closer when a shiver passed through Hannah's frame. This was not instinct alone. This was partnership. Daniel had learned to read that posture years earlier, on nights when Rex had held watch while he slept in hostile ground. As the storm intensified outside, the cabin became an island. Wind battered the walls, snow piling against windows until the world beyond ceased to exist. Daniel secured the shutters, reinforced the door, and checked his supplies with a methodical calm. He did not think about who had done this or why. That would come later. For now, the priority remained singular. He observed small changes: the return of color to Emily's lips, the steadier rhythm of Hannah's breath, the way Rex finally lowered his head while keeping his ears alert. Each sign was noted, catalogued, held quietly. Hours passed without ceremony. The fire crackled, water warmed. Wet clothing steamed near the hearth. Daniel remained awake, seated between the two cots, posture relaxed but ready, as if rest were a concept rather than an option. Outside, winter continued its assault, indifferent to the life it nearly claimed. Inside, survival held its ground, not through noise or triumph, but through deliberate, silent resolve. Consciousness returned unevenly, not as a single moment but as fragments stitched together by heat, smell, and pressure. Emily regained awareness first, her body responding before her mind fully followed. Her frame lay stiff beneath layered blankets, shoulders drawn inward as circulation struggled back into extremities numbed by hours of cold. She was in her early 30s, built lean and wiry, with the compact strength of someone accustomed to long patrols and high elevations rather than brute force. Her dark hair, cut just past the shoulders for practicality, was now loose and tangled, framing a face sharp at the cheekbones, eyes dark and observant even through fatigue. Years as a backcountry ranger had trained her to catalog details automatically, and even in recovery her attention moved outward, noting the cabin's structure, the placement of supplies, the steady rhythm of the fire. Hannah followed later, surfacing from deeper cold with visible effort. She was taller and broader, her body shaped by years of hauling gear and clearing trails, strength built steadily rather than aggressively. Her blonde hair had been braided tightly before the storm, now undone and dry, falling across a face marked by resilience more than softness. A faint scar cut through one eyebrow, old and healed, the result of a rockslide years earlier that had taken a colleague's life and hardened Hannah's approach to risk. Since then, she trusted preparation over optimism and instinct over protocol. As warmth returned, her breathing deepened, color slowly reappearing along her jaw and hands. Daniel observed both women closely, reading micro-movements rather than waiting for obvious signs. He adjusted the fire, repositioned blankets, and monitored their responses with a vigilance that came from loss rather than habit. Rex mirrored that attention, shifting his weight whenever either woman stirred, pressing closer without crowding, his large frame radiating heat while maintaining a protective arc between them and the door. The dog's eyes tracked movement constantly, amber gaze flicking toward the shuttered windows whenever the wind changed pitch, as if the storm itself might carry intent. As the hours passed, Emily's awareness sharpened. Her body responded unevenly, but her mind pushed forward, replaying memory with a clarity sharpened by danger. The fragments assembled into a single, unbroken line. Weeks of irregular data, satellite images that did not match field conditions, vehicle tracks appearing and vanishing along restricted zones. She had specialized in environmental data analysis before transferring to field patrol, a combination that allowed her to see patterns others dismissed. When reports began disappearing from shared systems, she had cross-checked manually, storing copies offline, suspecting interference long before certainty took shape. Hannah's recollection came with heavier weight. She remembered physical signs first: the smell of cut, timber where none should exist, the unnatural straightness of felled trunks hidden beneath snow, the quiet efficiency of machinery moved only at night. Her instincts had warned her that the operation was not the work of opportunistic poachers, but something larger, organized and protected. She had pushed for escalation, for bypassing local channels, but the responses had come back delayed, diluted, or not at all. The absence of resistance had been louder than denial. Between them, a picture formed without words. They had been tracking an illegal extraction route running through protected land, exploiting seasonal storms to mask movement. The scale suggested backing from outside the region, resources that required cooperation from within the system meant to stop it. The more evidence they gathered, the more resistance they encountered. Not overt threats at first, but silence, then records vanished. GPS logs reset. Communications lagged just enough to create doubt. When they chose to investigate a final anomaly in person, the decision sealed their fate. Daniel processed the implications methodically. He retrieved the strip of fabric from his pocket, its frozen fibers now thawed enough to reveal impressions pressed deep into the weave. He did not need to read it to understand its purpose. The message was not meant to inform, but to warn, not to scare, but to erase. The placement of the bodies had been calculated to delay discovery, positioned far enough from trails to ensure exposure would finish what restraint had begun. This was not an act of desperation. It was maintenance. Rex reacted to the shift in atmosphere before any movement occurred. His posture tightened subtly, ears angling toward the north-facing wall, nose lifting as if sampling a change too faint for humans. Daniel noted it immediately. He checked the door seals, reinforced the deadbolt, and moved the supplies closer to hand. He did not yet look for pursuit. Instead, he prepared for inevitability. Whoever had orchestrated the attack would not leave uncertainty behind. Loose ends invited exposure, and exposure threatened profit. Emily's breathing steadied as strength returned, but tension replaced weakness. Her fingers curled unconsciously as if reaching for tools no longer there. Hannah's jaw set, muscles along her neck tightening with resolve rather than fear. Both women had survived not because winter relented, but because someone had intervened. That reality sharpened the danger rather than easing it. Survival changed the equation. Daniel felt the familiar weight settle back into place, the one he had tried to shed by retreating into isolation. The forest outside remained sealed by snow, visibility near zero, but the threat had already crossed that boundary once. He understood with absolute clarity that the men responsible would not accept failure quietly. They would return, not to finish the work, but to ensure silence held. The truth might be buried beneath snow for now, but it was no longer alone, and winter, for all its cruelty, was no longer the most dangerous presence in the forest. Night tightened around the cabin like a fist, the storm easing just enough to sharpen sound rather than soften it. Snow still fell, but the wind's pitch changed, breaking into irregular pulses that Rex registered before any human sense could translate them. The German shepherd rose from his resting place with deliberate quiet, his large frame unfolding without haste, black and tan coat bristling along the spine. At 6 years old, Rex had the weight and bearing of a veteran. Thick chest, scar-mapped flank, eyes steady with purpose rather than excitement. He moved to the north-facing wall and froze, head angled, nostrils flaring, attention fixed on a disturbance that did not belong to weather. Daniel noticed the shift immediately, the way Rex's tail went rigid, the way his breathing slowed. Training reasserted itself inside Daniel, a mental narrowing that stripped away fatigue and doubt. He secured Emily and Hannah deeper within the cabin, reinforcing their insulation and positioning them away from windows without jostling their recovering bodies. Emily, pale but alert now, tracked Daniel's movements with focused awareness, her posture taut despite weakness. Hannah's strength had returned unevenly, her body still heavy with cold, but her eyes followed Rex's orientation toward the back of the structure, recognizing threat without needing explanation. Daniel moved methodically, extinguishing unnecessary light, closing shutters to reduce silhouettes, and clearing the floor of obstacles. He checked the door frame, then the rear access, where the snow drifted highest and concealment would be easiest. The trap revealed itself not through sight, but through absence. Snow around the back step was disturbed in a pattern too deliberate to be wind-shaped, a shallow depression leading away from the door rather than toward it. Daniel knelt, brushing aside loose powder with a gloved hand, exposing a thin wire stretched taut at ankle height, its dull surface nearly invisible against shadowed wood. He followed its line with his eyes to a compact device half buried beneath ice-packed soil, crude but lethal, assembled with practical knowledge and intent. This was not intimidation. This was termination. Daniel's jaw set, the familiar anger present but controlled, folded into focus. He disabled the device with practiced speed, cutting the wire and isolating the charge without triggering it, then moved laterally along the cabin's exterior, marking additional anomalies: compressed snow, boot impressions spaced for stability, the faint scent of oil carried by fabric. Rex mirrored his movement from inside, repositioning to maintain cover over the women while tracking Daniel's progress through sound alone. The forest beyond the tree line shifted subtly, branches bending under added weight, shadows thickening where none should be. The first impact came without warning, a sharp crack that split the night as a round struck the outer wall, biting into timber, inches from where Daniel had been moments before. He rolled, pressed flat against the ground, and returned fire, not to strike flesh but to command space, sending splinters flying and forcing the attackers to reposition. More shots followed, controlled, disciplined, probing rather than panicked. The cabin absorbed the blows with dull thuds, logs doing what they were built to do. Inside, Rex braced, placing his body between the women and the direction of the threat, posture squared, ready to intercept anything that breached the threshold. Daniel moved decisively, drawing the attacker's attention away from the cabin, breaking cover long enough to create the illusion of retreat. Snow swallowed his steps as he circled back, using the terrain he knew intimately, guiding movement toward a narrow approach where footing turned treacherous. One figure advanced too quickly, momentum overtaking caution, boots slipping on ice-hardened ground. Daniel closed the distance in seconds, a controlled collision that ended with the attacker pinned and disarmed, breath knocked loose, resistance fading under precise restraint. The man was younger than Daniel expected, mid-30s at most, lean and angular, face weathered by exposure rather than age. A short beard framed sharp cheekbones, eyes calculating even in defeat, the expression of someone accustomed to operating without accountability. His clothing was utilitarian, dark insulated layers, reinforced gloves, boots designed for long travel rather than speed. This was not a local drifter. This was hired competence. Daniel secured him quickly and searched him with efficiency, retrieving a compact communication device sealed against moisture, its surface scratched from use. The device pulsed faintly, a timed signal cycling through encrypted bursts. Daniel shut it down and examined the stored data, noting a rendezvous route mapped across restricted terrain, coordinates converging toward a narrow pass farther north. The remaining figures withdrew as quickly as they had arrived, melting back into the trees once the advantage was lost. The forest swallowed them without ceremony, leaving behind silence thick with spent energy and snow settling back into place. Daniel dragged the restrained attacker into cover near the cabin's foundation, securing him away from sight and weather, then reinforced the perimeter with quick, improvised alarms fashioned from tools and materials at hand. Inside, he returned to Rex's side, placing a hand briefly against the dog's shoulder. Grounding both of them in shared readiness, Emily's gaze met his from the dim light near the hearth, understanding clear despite exhaustion. Hannah's breathing steadied, her posture tightening with renewed resolve rather than fear. The cabin had been tested and had held, but the night's message was unmistakable. The operation against the women had not ended in the forest. It had followed them here. The captured device and mapped route confirmed what Daniel already knew with certainty. This was no random cleanup. It was a coordinated effort with a timetable, one that assumed silence by morning. The attackers had miscalculated not the terrain, but the presence of someone willing and able to refuse erasure. As Daniel secured the last shutter and returned to watch, the storm outside continued to fall, masking tracks and sound alike. The first confrontation had ended, but the hunt had only just begun. Dawn never fully arrived, only a thinning of darkness that revealed the land in hard edges and muted blue. Daniel chose the timing deliberately. The storm had scoured tracks from the night before, gifting concealment at the cost of cold that burned deeper with every breath. He moved first, reading the terrain the way he once read streets overseas, eyes measuring distance, slope, and sound. Emily and Hannah followed at a controlled interval, their recovery incomplete but sufficient. Bodies wrapped in layered insulation, movements economical. Emily's posture was compact and precise, a habit formed from years balancing equipment weight against stamina. Her dark hair was bound tight, her gaze trained on the ground ahead, where data would soon matter more than distance. Hannah's stride was longer, steadier, her shoulders squared despite lingering pain, strength reclaimed through will rather than rest. Rex ranged ahead and then back again, the German Shepherd's heavy coat now trimmed with frost, paws finding purchase on ice-slick stone as if the pass had been drawn into him rather than crossed. The canyon revealed itself gradually, walls rising like frozen teeth, narrowing the sky to a pale ribbon. It was a place that funneled movement and magnified sound, perfect for transfer under cover of weather. Daniel studied the approach, noting tire scars etched into ice, faint but persistent, and the way wind had piled snow into drifts that concealed recent disturbance rather than erased it. He guided the team into shadowed cover along a rock shelf that overlooked the corridor, positioning them where sightlines converged without exposing silhouettes. Rex settled into a low crouch near the choke point, muscles coiled, attention fixed on the mouth of the pass. Emily prepared her equipment with steady hands, securing a compact camera against vibration, aligning lenses to capture identifiers rather than faces. Her temperament favored proof over confrontation, patterns over impulse, a mindset honed by watching evidence disappear when it traveled the wrong channels. Hannah assisted with markers, small, durable beacons designed to register location and movement, placed discreetly where vehicles would pass without noticing. Her experience had taught her that physical traces told stories when people refused to speak. Daniel coordinated without words, gestures minimal, intent clear. The first sign came as vibration through stone rather than sound, a low tremor that resolved into engine noise as headlights pierced the canyon's bend. 2 vehicles emerged, heavy-duty trucks modified for cold, their lights kept low, beams angled down to avoid distant reflection. Exhaust plumed white, engines idling with disciplined patience. Men moved around the vehicles with practiced efficiency, silhouettes layered in dark insulated gear, faces obscured, motions economical. Daniel counted positions and spacing, noting how weapons were carried without display, the posture of people accustomed to operating where authority did not intrude. He shifted, exposing just enough movement to draw attention, then withdrew along a line he knew would pull pursuit toward the narrowest stretch. The tactic worked. 2 figures advanced cautiously, boots crunching on ice, rifles raised but controlled. Daniel retreated deeper into shadow, keeping them engaged without committing, letting the canyon do the work of compression. At his signal, Rex broke cover, a sudden decisive force that cut across the escape line. body low and fast, presence overwhelming without reckless charge. The German Shepherd's timing was precise, forcing hesitation, turning momentum inward where footing betrayed confidence. Emily and Hannah held their positions, focus absolute. Emily tracked movement through the lens, capturing plates, markings, insignia etched into metal rather than uniforms. Hannah placed the last beacon as a truck lurched forward, the device disappearing beneath snow churned by spinning tires. The canyon amplified everything now. Engine roar, shouted signals swallowed by wind, the metallic snap of weapons coming to bear. Daniel pressed the advantage, herding the group into the pass's tightest bend where maneuverability collapsed and options narrowed. The arrival of the Federal team was not announced by sirens, but by geometry. Lights flared at both ends of the canyon, white and blinding, transforming night into stark exposure. Vehicles blocked the exits with deliberate placement, doors opening in unison as figures moved with rehearsed clarity. The lead agent was a tall man in his early 40s with a square build and a face weathered by long field assignments rather than desk duty. His beard was trimmed close, hair dark and receding, posture calm in the way of someone accustomed to decisive authority. Alongside him moved a woman a few years younger, compact and athletic, her hair pulled into a tight bun beneath a cap, eyes sharp with focus that suggested a career built on patient dismantling rather than spectacle. Their team fanned out, weapons trained, angles covered, the canyon locked down without haste. Daniel withdrew to cover, maintaining overwatch while the perimeter closed. Rex returned to his side, chest heaving once before settling, eyes still scanning. Emily lowered her camera only when the scene stabilized, cataloging the alignment of vehicles and the placement of personnel as if imprinting it into memory. Hannah straightened despite fatigue, shoulders lifting with the release of held tension, her attention fixed on the seized trucks where concealed compartments now lay exposed under scrutiny. The operation concluded with methodical restraint. Individuals were secured, vehicles immobilized, evidence preserved where it stood. Snow continued to fall, softening the scene without obscuring it, a quiet counterpoint to the finality taking shape. Daniel observed from the ridge, neither intervening nor retreating, the familiar, distance settling between him and resolution. The canyon, once a corridor for secrecy, had become a ledger written in light and steel. As the Federal team consolidated control, Daniel signaled withdrawal. Emily gathered her equipment, movements precise despite exhaustion, the data now redundant yet essential. Hannah retrieved the last marker, leaving nothing behind that would betray their presence. Rex took point on the return, the dog's posture easing only slightly, vigilance tempered by completion rather than relief. The frozen pass receded behind them, its walls closing back into shadow as if the land itself were sealing a wound. The network had been caught not by force alone, but by timing and terrain turned honest. Daniel moved on with the others into the thinning snow, aware that the hunt had reached its apex and passed. What remained was aftermath, and the quieter work of ensuring the truth did not freeze over again. Morning arrived without ceremony, the kind that followed violence not with celebration, but with quiet repair. The snow had eased into a thin, steady fall, softening the sharp edges left behind by engines, boots, and gunfire. Light spread slowly across the valley, revealing the canyon now sealed and silent, its frozen walls bearing no sign of the chaos they had contained hours earlier. Daniel moved through this new stillness with measured calm, shoulders relaxed, but posture intact, the lines of tension in his face easing into something closer to acceptance than relief. At 35, his features carried the geometry of discipline, sharp cheekbones, a squared jaw shadowed by a short, untrimmed beard, eyes pale and steady. They were the eyes of a man who had learned that endings were rarely clean, but beginnings could be quiet if one allowed them to be. The federal operation continued behind him, methodical and contained. Vehicles were catalogued, evidence sealed. The last figures led away under guard. Among them was the internal facilitator uncovered through layered records and recovered data, a man whose authority had once been taken for protection rather than suspicion. He was middle-aged, broad through the chest, hair thinning and prematurely gray, a face shaped by comfort rather than endurance. His downfall came not from panic, but from routine, patterns repeated too often, assumptions made too confidently. Daniel observed without satisfaction, understanding that accountability was not revenge, but restoration. Emily stood nearby, wrapped in a heavy coat provided by the federal team, her posture straighter now despite lingering fatigue. Her dark hair was pulled back neatly, movements precise as she assisted with final documentation. There was a clarity in her expression, a quiet vindication that did not seek witnesses. She had built her career on careful observation, on trusting data over reassurance, and seeing the operation dismantled confirmed what she had always known. Truth did not need volume to endure. Hannah stood beside her, taller and broader, shoulders squared as if bearing weight no longer necessary. The scar along her brow caught the light briefly, a reminder of past loss now balanced by present outcome. Her gaze moved across the protected land with a steadiness born of purpose renewed. Rex broke from the group and ran ahead into the open snow, his stride powerful and unencumbered. At 6 years old, his body remained solid and capable, muscles rolling beneath a thick coat now free of ice. His tail cut clean arcs through the air, energy released not in frenzy, but in assurance. He paused occasionally, circling back toward Daniel before pushing forward again, a living tether between movement and belonging. Daniel watched him go, a faint warmth settling behind his ribs. Rex had never questioned direction. He had followed, guarded, waited, and acted when needed. In that loyalty, Daniel recognized the reflection of a life not defined by escape, but by presence. The return to the cabin was slower, unhurried. Snow muffled their steps, the forest standing witness without judgment. The structure came into view much as it had days earlier, scarred now, its log walls bearing the marks of impact, splintered wood visible where rounds had struck. Daniel approached it without hesitation. He assessed damage with the same care he had once given to equipment and teammates, cataloging what needed repair, what could wait. Emily and Hannah paused at the edge of the clearing, allowing him space, their respect conveyed through distance rather than words. Over the following days, Daniel stayed. He worked with deliberate patience, replacing damaged timber, reinforcing weak points, restoring the cabin to function rather than perfection. His movements were steady, his breathing even, the work grounding him in a rhythm that did not demand reflection. Rex remained nearby, resting in the sun when it broke through cloud cover, rising instantly whenever Daniel shifted position, a constant, reassuring presence. Emily and Hannah visited briefly before departing for formal reinstatement. Their uniforms returned to them not as symbols, but as responsibilities reclaimed. Their departure was quiet, marked by nods rather than ceremony, an understanding forged under pressure that did not require maintenance. On the final morning, the valley lay open and bright, snow glittering under a pale sky. Daniel stepped outside and stopped, taking in the silence not as absence but as balance restored. Rex ran ahead once more, carving fresh lines into untouched snow, unburdened and whole. Daniel felt no pull to leave, no urge to disappear further north or retreat deeper into isolation. The war he had carried with him had loosened its grip, not because it had been erased, but because it had been redirected toward preservation rather than avoidance. He stood there for a long moment, hands resting at his sides, the cold sharp and clean in his lungs. The forest no longer felt like a place to hide. It felt like a place entrusted to him, however briefly, however quietly. Daniel Brooks had not come to Alaska to be a guardian, but when the moment arrived, he had chosen to remain. In that choice, amid repaired walls and fresh snow, he found a version of peace that did not ask him to run. At the end of this story, one truth remains clear. Miracles do not always arrive as light from the sky or voices from heaven. Sometimes they arrive quietly, through a man who refuses to look away, a loyal dog that senses danger before it speaks, or a second chance given in the coldest moment. God's work often moves through ordinary people who choose courage when fear would be easier, compassion when silence would be safer. In our daily lives, we may never face a blizzard in Alaska, but we all face storms, moments when someone nearby needs help, hope, or protection. If this story touched your heart, let it remind you that faith is not only believing, but acting. Share this story with someone who needs encouragement. Leave a comment with your thoughts or prayer requests, and subscribe to the channel so these messages can reach more hearts. May God bless you, keep you safe, and guide you through every storm you face. Amen.